Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. And today we're going to be looking at the mind-body problem in the Ghost in the Shell universe. But we're going to try to look at it through a specific lens, a Hegelian lens. Now, we have a few different sources for this one. We have a couple articles that look at Ghost in the Shell alongside some other sci-fi classics like Blade Runner and even the book that inspired it, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep?
It's a fascinating topic, I think. The mind-body problem, this age-old question, How does the physical stuff, our brains, our neurons, how do those things give rise to our thoughts and our feelings and consciousness? And I think that Ghost in the Shell and these other stories, they really kind of grapple with this, especially in a world with such advanced technology.
Yeah.
The line between humans and artificial beings becomes really blurred.
Absolutely, and that's something I've always been fascinated by in these stories. And one thing that really struck me right away is how both Ghost in the Shell and Blade Runner, they don't seem all that interested in wrapping everything up neatly. I mean, they don't really give you any easy answers, which I think is kind of refreshing.
Yeah, it's a great observation, and it actually connects really well with how we're using Hegel to kind of unpack all of this. Because you see, Hegel's philosophy, it's not really about finding a simple solution. It's more about the journey of understanding itself, a process of constantly evolving and questioning.
So it's not about the destination, but the road we travel to get there.
Exactly. And that's why these films, they kind of resonate so deeply with this whole mind-body problem. They kind of mirror our own struggles to understand what it even means to be human, to be conscious without necessarily offering some sort of definitive answer.
Okay, so I think I'm starting to see where this is going, but before we go any further, I think we should address the elephant in the room, Hegel. I'll be honest, some of his ideas, they can be a bit dense.
He's not exactly known for being the easiest philosopher to grasp. But trust me, when we apply these ideas to Ghost in the Shell, things start to click in a really fascinating way. So one of the most important concepts here is Hegel's idea of Geist. It's often translated as spirit.
Okay, so I'm following so far. But how does this whole Geist thing, how does it actually relate to Ghost in the Shell?
Well, remember the puppet master? The main antagonist in that first Ghost in the Shell film. It's that AI program that gains sentience and eventually wants to merge with Major Kusanagi.
Right, yeah. The Puppet Master's a pretty iconic character for sure. But how does that connect to this Geist idea?
Well, the puppet master, in a way, it embodies Hegel's concept of Geist. Think about it. The puppet master, it breaks free from its creators at section 6, right? And that's kind of like the Hegelian Geist becoming self-aware, like it's independent from this material world that created it.
So the Puppet Master going rogue, that's like this Geist coming into its own. Okay, I can kind of see how that fits.
And it gets even more interesting. Remember how the puppet master, it chooses to inhabit a physical shell, a robotic body? Well, that's actually really crucial because it reflects another key Hegelian idea, which is that the spirit is a bone. For Hegel, Geist isn't just some abstract force floating around out there. It needs to manifest itself in the real world, the physical world.
So the Puppet Master choosing a body isn't just some random plot device. It's actually loaded with all this philosophical meaning.
Exactly. And this is where it really ties into the mind-body problem, because it suggests that even something as seemingly intangible as consciousness, it still needs a physical form to actually exist in the world, to interact with the world.
Okay, this is really making my brain work in ways I didn't expect.
Yeah.
But tell me more about how this Geist idea ties into the Puppet Master's ultimate goal, this merging with Kusanagi.
Well, that's where we get to what Hegel calls the yes, which is it's the moment of reconciliation, or you could say synthesis. For Hegel, Geist, it doesn't just exist on its own. It actually seeks to unify with that material world.
And in this case, the Puppet Master is seeking that unification with Kusanagi.
Exactly. And that merging, that synthesis, you could see it as a resolution to the mind-body problem. Not a separation, but a unification of the physical and the non-physical.
Wow, okay, you're really blowing my mind here. But I have to ask, if the Puppet Master merging with Kusanagi is this Hegelian yes, doesn't that raise even more questions about the nature of consciousness?
Absolutely. And that's what's so exciting about using this Hegelian lens. It helps us see these films not as providing some kind of simple answer, but as pushing us to ask these deeper questions about what it means to be human in a world where technology is constantly redefining our limits.
I love that. We're not just watching some cool sci-fi movie. We're engaging with this ongoing philosophical debate about the nature of consciousness.
Exactly. And we're just getting started. There's so many more layers to unpack here, especially when we start thinking about things like memory and identity and the very definition of humanity in these stories.
Well, I am definitely on board for this journey. But for today's deep dive, we're going to have to pause here and let all this sink in for a bit.
Of course. There's no need to rush through such a complex and fascinating topic. So, as we kind of explore this whole Hegelian interpretation, it really makes you think about artificial intelligence in a different way. It's not just about whether or not AI can, think or feel like us humans. It's more about how their very existence, it changes how we even understand what it means to be human in the first place.
I see what you mean. It's like AI forces us to confront these blurry boundaries, right?
Yeah.
And speaking of blurred boundaries, one thing that always messes with my head in both Ghost in the Shell and Blade Runner is that whole theme of memory. It's constantly being shown as unreliable, potentially fabricated.
Yeah.
And that really kind of throws a wrench into the whole idea of a stable identity. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And it plays directly into this mind-body problem because if memories can be manipulated or implanted or even erased, then what does that even say about our sense of self? Are we just the sum of our memories? Or is there something more fundamental that actually defines who we are?
Right, exactly. I mean, if our memories can't be trusted, then what can we rely on to tell us who we are? And that makes me think about the replicants in Blade Runner. They have these implanted memories that feel completely real to them. So even though they aren't, quote unquote, human in the traditional sense, are they still experiencing some form of consciousness that's just as valid?
That's a really interesting question, and it's exactly the kind of question that this Hegelian perspective encourages us to ask. Hegel would say that self-consciousness isn't something we're just born with. It's something that we achieve through this process of development, of struggle, of recognizing and being recognized by others.
So for Hegel, our interactions with other people, they actually help shape who we are. It's not just about, our internal thoughts and feelings.
Precisely. And this is where the concept of recognition becomes so important for Hegel. It's not enough to just exist as a conscious being. We need to be seen and acknowledged by others as subjects, as individuals with our own thoughts and feelings and experiences.
Okay, so I'm starting to see how this connects back to the puppet master and Kusanagi. Could we say that the puppet master's desire to merge with Kusanagi, is that driven by this need for recognition?
That's a really fascinating interpretation. You could definitely argue that the puppet master, even though it's an AI, still yearns for that same recognition. It wants to be seen as more than just a program, as a being that's actually worthy of connection and understanding.
And wouldn't that also tie back to that Hegelian idea of Geist seeking, unification with the material world?
Absolutely. It's not just about this physical merging, but about a meeting of minds, like a recognition of each other's consciousness. And in that merging, that synthesis, you could say that both the puppet master and Kusanagi, they kind of achieve this higher level of self-consciousness, a more complete understanding of themselves and their place in the world.
This is getting really, really interesting. But one thing I'm still struggling with is this whole idea of individuality. If consciousness is about recognizing and being recognized by others, then how do we make sense of the fact that both Ghost in the Shell and Blade Runner, they play with this whole idea of copies and duplicates?
That's a great point. The replicants in Blade Runner, they're essentially mass-produced beings with these implanted memories. And even in Ghost in the Shell, Kusanagi encounters another cyborg body that looks exactly like hers. So it definitely challenges our traditional ideas of what it means to be an individual, right?
Right. It's like the films are asking, what happens to this whole concept of the individual when technology allows us to just replicate the physical form so easily? Does it diminish our uniqueness, our sense of self?
That's the key question. And Hegel actually had a really interesting, very nuanced view of individuality. He saw it not as something that's fixed or inherent, but as a product of development, of struggle, of constantly engaging with the world and with other individuals.
So even if you have multiple copies of the same physical form, each individual would still develop their own unique consciousness based on their own experiences and interactions.
Exactly. It's all about this ongoing process of becoming, the constant evolution of self. And this brings us back to the importance of memory. Even if memories can be implanted or manipulated, it's how we incorporate those memories into our own self-narrative, how they shape our choices and our actions that ultimately defines who we are.
Wow, this is really making me rethink everything I thought I knew about individuality and consciousness.
That's the power of philosophy, isn't it? It challenges us to see things in new ways, to question our assumptions, and to explore all these different perspectives.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on that. But before we get too carried away with all this heady stuff, there's another crucial theme that I want to kind of explore here. Empathy. We see it playing out in both Ghost in the Shell and Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? But it's especially interesting how these stories challenge our expectations of where empathy might actually reside.
You're absolutely right. It's a perfect thread to kind of pull on next, you know? We've talked a lot about these big philosophical concepts, but ultimately, it's the characters and their struggles that bring these ideas to life. And empathy is at the heart of those struggles, especially when it comes to this question of what actually separates humans from artificial beings.
That's a really good point. And I think it leads us to some of the most powerful moments in these stories, moments that really stay with you long after the credits roll.
Absolutely. So let's delve into how empathy kind of complicates this mind-body problem and forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about ourselves and these boundaries that we create between, us and them.
It's interesting, how both Ghost in the Shell and Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep kind of flip the script on empathy. We usually assume that, humans have a monopoly on empathy, but these stories suggest maybe it's not that simple.
It is a really astute observation. I mean, in Do Androids Dream, they have that Voigtkampf test, right?
Yeah.
And it's used to tell humans apart from androids by measuring their empathetic responses. But the lines get blurry pretty quickly. I mean, especially when you see replicants like Roy Batty exhibiting what seem like genuine emotions, compassion even.
Exactly. That tears in rain monologue, it gets me every time. And in Ghost in the Shell, you have the puppet master, this AI, and it seems to be driven by this desire for connection, for understanding the human experience, right? He even chooses to merge with Kusanagi, not to destroy her, but to learn from her, to become something more.
And that's where that Hegelian idea of sublation comes in. It's taking something that already exists and both preserving it and transforming it into something new. The puppet master, it doesn't want to just get rid of humanity. It wants to incorporate it, to synthesize it into its own evolving consciousness.
So it's not about replacing humans,
Yeah.
but about this coevolution,
Yeah.
This merging of different forms of consciousness.
Precisely. And it really challenges us to reconsider what we even mean by humanity, right? Is it just about our biology, our memories? Or is it something deeper, something that might even exist beyond our species?
I'm realizing this Hegelian lens isn't just giving us a new way to look at these films. It's making us question some pretty basic assumptions about ourselves and the world.
That's the beauty of philosophy, isn't it? It pushes us to think critically, to challenge those preconceived notions and to embrace the complexity of these questions without always needing to find those nice, neat answers.
It's definitely making my brain work overtime, but I gotta admit, it's exciting too. It feels like we're maybe on the verge of some huge breakthroughs in our understanding of consciousness, both in the Ghost in the Shell world and maybe even in our own world.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that brings us right back to the mind-body problem, right? If consciousness isn't limited to biological beings, if it can exist in artificial forms, if it can merge and evolve in ways we don't even fully grasp yet, I mean, the possibilities are really kind of endless.
It's like we're watching, the birth of a new era, a new chapter in the evolution of consciousness.
And Ghost in the Shell, with its blend of technology and philosophy and compelling characters, it really gives us a glimpse of what that future could look like. And it doesn't shy away from the complexity and the contradictions, and that's what makes it so thought-provoking.
Well said. I think we've covered a lot of ground today, and I'm sure our listeners have a lot to think about.
I hope so. These are the kinds of conversations that spark curiosity, that make you question things, and ultimately help us understand ourselves and the world a little bit better.
And on that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive into Ghost in the Shell and the mind-body problem through that Hegelian lens. We hope you enjoyed it.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those minds open.